James Carter set down his mop and walked straight toward the $65 million jet. The Gulfstream G700 sat gleaming under the hangar lights, white and silver, every curve engineered for speed and precision. It belonged to billionaires, to celebrities, to people whose names appeared on magazine covers and stock tickers. It did not belong to the man in the gray janitor's uniform with coffee stains still drying on his chest. Alexandra Sterling's voice cut through the hangar like a blade. "Security, stop him right now." But no one moved. The security guard at the main entrance shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The maintenance crew froze mid-task wrenches suspended in air. Miranda Collins, the woman who had spilled that coffee on James not 6 hours ago, stood with her mouth hanging open, her designer phone forgotten in her manicured hand. Because the invisible man, the nobody who had scrubbed their toilets and mopped their floors for 2 years, was climbing into the cockpit like he owned the aircraft. Alexandra's mocking smile froze on her face. She had just told him to fly her jet as a joke. A cruel, thoughtless joke designed to humiliate him in front of everyone. She had laughed when she said it, that cold laugh of hers that made subordinates shrink and competitors flinch. She had asked him to marry her if he could land without a scratch, knowing the absurdity would echo through the building for weeks. The janitor proposing to the billionaire heiress. The mop pusher playing pilot. She did not know that James Carter had once been Captain James Carter. She did not know about the combat missions over Afghanistan, the test flights at Edwards Air Force Base, the distinguished flying crosses that sat in a shoebox somewhere in his cramped apartment. She did not know about the crash that killed his co-pilot, the wife he buried 2 years later, the son waiting at home with a babysitter who charged by the hour. And she had no idea that in 90 minutes she would be crying in the passenger seat, not from fear, but from shame. The hangar fell silent as James disappeared through the aircraft door. Somewhere in the distance a phone rang unanswered. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song. And everyone who had ever looked through James Carter like he was made of glass suddenly found themselves unable to look away. 6 hours earlier, the coffee had been the temperature of fresh lava. It hit James square in the chest, splashing across his gray uniform in an expanding stain that looked like a wound refusing to close. The liquid soaked through to his skin, hot enough to make him clench his jaw, but he did not flinch. He did not move. He simply stood there with the mop in his hand, watching the brown rivulets trace their way down his shirt and onto the floor he had spent the last hour cleaning. Miranda Collins did not even look up from her phone. "You missed a spot." Her voice carried that particular tone of bored contempt that came naturally to people who had never cleaned anything in their lives. "And get someone to deal with this mess. I need another coffee." James stared at the back of her head. 40 years old, maybe 42, with hair the color of champagne, and a soul the temperature of her morning drink. She had been at Sterling Private Aviation for 10 years, climbing the corporate ladder with sharp elbows and sharper words. He had been here for 2 years, invisible, forgettable, a piece of furniture that occasionally moved. "Yes, ma'am." He bent down and started mopping again. The same floor, the same stain, the same silence that followed him everywhere in this building. Sterling Private Aviation occupied the top 3 floors of Chicago's most exclusive airport facility. Private jets for billionaires, charter flights for celebrities, a rooftop runway that cost more than most neighborhoods combined. The company served clients whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small countries, people who measured time in stock options and distance in nautical miles. James knew every inch of the place, every corner where dust accumulated despite his efforts, every executive bathroom with its Italian marble and motion sensor faucets, every conference room where deals worth millions were signed while he emptied trash cans 3 feet away. Nobody saw him. That was the agreement he had made with himself when he took this job. Stay invisible, stay quiet, cash the check, go home to Nathan. His son was the only thing that mattered now. Again. The voice came from behind him, deep and weathered like old leather. James looked up to find Frank Morrison standing in the doorway of the supply closet, arms crossed over his chest, watching him change into a fresh uniform shirt. "It's fine, Frank. That's the 3rd time this month. Miranda, I said it's fine." Frank Morrison was 64 years old, with hands like tanned cowhide and eyes that had seen everything in 40 years of working around aircraft. He had started as a teenage mechanic at a regional airport in Nebraska, worked his way up through the ranks, and now served as the senior ground technician at Sterling. He could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone, could smell a fuel leak from 50 yards, could read the weather better than most meteorologists. He could also read people. Frank leaned against the door frame, his expression shifting from concern to something more contemplative. "You know, I've worked with pilots my whole life. I know what they look like, how they move, how they carry themselves." James's hand stopped on the buttons of his fresh uniform. "You walk like a pilot, James. You look at aircraft like a pilot. Hell, I've seen you watching takeoffs like a man watching his first love drive away." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "I'm a janitor." "No." Frank pushed off the door frame, his boots scuffing against the concrete floor. "You're a janitor now, but that's not what you are." James finished buttoning his shirt and picked up his mop. The wooden handle was smooth from years of use, worn down by hands that had held it before his hands that would hold it after. There was a comfort in that continuity, a kind of anonymous immortality. What you're doing right now doesn't define who you are. The words came from Frank's mouth, but they echoed in James's head with a different voice. A woman's voice. A voice he heard only in dreams now. "My shift ends at 6. Nathan's waiting." He walked past Frank without another word, pushing the mop bucket ahead of him, the wheels squeaking against the polished floor. Behind him, Frank said nothing. The old man simply watched him go, a knowing look in his eyes that James could feel even without turning around. The clock on the wall read 5:47 p.m., 13 more minutes of being invisible. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people standing. The refrigerator hummed constantly, a white noise that James had learned to ignore. The carpet in the living room was worn thin in a path between the couch and the television. The windows looked out onto the parking lot of a strip mall that had seen better days. But it was home. Nathan Carter was 7 years old, with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn chin. He had her laugh too, that surprised burst of joy that used to fill their old house back when they had a house, back when they had her. Now it was just the 2 of them in this apartment that smelled like carpet cleaner and microwaved dinners. When James walked through the door, the boy launched himself at his father's legs like a heat-seeking missile. Dad, we learned about airplanes today." James lifted him up, held him close, let the weight of the day fall away for just a moment. Nathan's arms wrapped around his neck, sticky fingers and all, and for a few seconds, nothing else existed. Not the coffee stain, not Miranda's contempt, not the endless parade of floors that needed mopping. Yeah, what did you learn? Mrs. Patterson showed us pictures. Big ones, she said pilots are heroes. The word hit James somewhere deep in a place he had walled off years ago. Did she now? Uh-huh. She said they fly really high, higher than birds, higher than clouds even. And they have to be really brave because if something goes wrong... Nathan's voice trailed off his young mind, touching the edge of a concept too dark to fully grasp. If something goes wrong, they have to fix it. James finished for him. That's part of the job. The boy's face grew serious, his mother's eyes studying his father with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. Were you ever a pilot, Dad? The question hit James like a bullet. Why would you ask that? Because you always look at the sky. Mom used to say... Nathan stopped. His lips pressed together the way they did when he was trying not to cry. What did Mom say? The boy fidgeted in his father's arms, his small fingers playing with the collar of James's uniform. She said you used to fly before I was born, before everything got sad. James set his son down, knelt to eye level. The carpet was rough under his knees. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the highway. That was a long time ago, buddy. A different life. But you could fly again, right if you wanted to. James looked at his son, 7 years old, everything ahead of him, everything to lose. Some doors close for good reasons, Nathan. Now come on, let's make spaghetti. The boy's face lit up the heavy questions forgotten in the promise of his favorite dinner. He ran to the kitchen, climbing onto his step stool to reach the cabinet where they kept the pasta. James watched him for a moment, this small person who depended on him for everything, who looked at him like he could solve any problem, fix any broken thing. If only he knew. As James stood at the stove stirring sauce, his hands gripped the wooden spoon like it was a yoke. And in his mind, he was climbing, always climbing, into clouds he would never touch again. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 7:30 to watch Nathan the same time she arrived every night. James worked the late shift. She was 67 years old, a retired elementary school teacher who lived 3 doors down and charged $20 a night plus leftovers. Her husband had passed 4 years ago, and she seemed to genuinely enjoy the company of a 7-year-old who asked endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to why the sky was blue. How was work? James pulled on his jacket, checking his pockets for his badge and keys. Same as always. That bad, huh? He almost smiled. Almost. Nathan's already asleep. There's leftover spaghetti in the fridge if you get hungry. I'll be fine. Mrs. Patterson settled into her usual spot on the couch, the romance novel she was reading already in her hands. You be careful out there. Weather report says there might be storms coming. There's always storms coming. He meant it in more ways than one, but she just nodded and opened her book. The drive to Sterling took 23 minutes this time of night when the highways were empty and the city lights stretched out like a circuit board beneath the stars. James drove an 11-year-old Toyota Camry with 180,000 miles on the odometer and a passenger side mirror held on with duct tape. The heater worked most of the time. The radio played only static on half the stations. But it got him where he needed to go. The night shift at Sterling was different from the day, quieter. The executives went home to their mansions in the suburbs, leaving behind empty offices and silent hallways. The aircraft sat dormant in their hangars, expensive machines waiting for expensive people to take them expensive places. James liked the night shift. Fewer eyes to look through him. Fewer voices to ignore him. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant whine of aircraft on the main runway passenger jets carrying ordinary people to ordinary destinations. He was mopping the executive corridor when the clock struck 3 in the morning. The building was empty except for the overnight security guard and the skeleton maintenance crew. His mop moved in long, practiced strokes, leaving wet trails that dried to a shine. And then the nightmare came. It did not wait for him to fall asleep. It never did anymore. The nightmare always started the same way. Marcus Thompson's face, young and terrified, filling the cockpit of the experimental F-22 variant they had been testing. 24 years old. First deployment in James's unit. Eager, talented, reminded James of himself at that age. "What do we do, Captain? What do we do?" The alarm was screaming. Red lights flashed across every display. The altimeter spun backward as the aircraft fell caught in a flat spin that defied every recovery technique in the book. 15,000 feet. 12,000. 9,000. "Stay with me, Lieutenant. We're going to get through this." But they weren't. James knew it even as he said the words. The flight control system had failed catastrophically. The experimental fly-by-wire interface, turning their aircraft into a 40,000-pound coffin, falling at 6,000 feet per minute. He tried everything. Full opposite rudder. Nose down to break the spin. Cut the engines. Nothing worked. The Nevada desert rushed up toward them like a fist. Pull up, terrain, pull up. The automated warning system was designed to save lives. In that moment, it only counted down their death. James fought the controls with everything he had. His arms burned. His vision narrowed from the G-forces. Sweat soaked through his flight suit as the ground grew larger in the canopy. And then, somehow, the spin broke. The aircraft lurched forward, trading rotation for a steep dive. James hauled back on the stick, feeling the airframe shudder as he pulled 7 Gs, his vision going gray at the edges. They hit the ground at 200 knots. The emergency landing was textbook if you ignored the fact that they were in an open field rather than a runway, if you ignored the explosion of dust and debris, if you ignored the way the aircraft broke apart around them, like a toy in the hands of an angry child. James walked away with a concussion and 3 cracked ribs. Marcus did not walk away. The mop clattered to the floor as James jerked back to reality, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. The executive corridor was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song. The clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. 8 years. 8 years since the crash, and it still found him in quiet moments, still ambushed him when he let his guard down. He picked up the mop with shaking hands and continued his work. There was nothing else to do. There was never anything else to do. Just keep moving. Keep working. Keep pushing through one day at a time until the days themselves started to blur together. The investigation had cleared him. Equipment failure. Nothing he could have done. They had offered him his command, back offered him a promotion, commendations, everything. He had refused it all, because every time he looked at a cockpit, he saw Marcus's face. Every time he touched the controls, he heard that young voice asking what to do, like James had the answer, like James could save him. He couldn't fly anymore. So he stopped. And when Emily died 2 years later, his wife, the mother of his son, the only person who knew all his broken pieces, he stopped pretending he would ever be whole again. Now he was a janitor, Now he was invisible. Now he was nothing. Just the way he wanted it. The call came at 6:00 a.m. James was finishing his shift, wringing out his mop one final time when the chaos erupted. The main doors of the executive hangar burst open, and Alexandra Sterling stormed through like a hurricane made flesh. He had seen her before, of course. Everyone at Sterling had seen her. 43 years old, the CEO since her father handed over control. 5 years ago, she ran the company with the precision of a Swiss watch and the warmth of a meat locker. She wore navy suits that cost more than James made in a month, carried phones that hadn't been released to the public yet, and looked at employees like they were furniture that occasionally required maintenance. Today, something was different. Her face was pale, her perfect composure cracked. She held her phone in a white-knuckled grip, two assistants scrambling behind her like planets orbiting a collapsing star. What do you mean, unconscious, when, how bad? Her voice cracked on the last word. James had never heard that before. In 2 years of cleaning around her through her past he had never once heard Alexandra Sterling's voice crack. I'm coming. I don't care about the hurricane warnings. I'm coming. She ended the call and threw the phone to Miranda Collins, who caught it with practiced ease. Get me a pilot, now. I need to be in Miami in 2 hours. Miranda's fingers flew across her tablet, her face tightening with each swipe. Captain Reynolds is in Seattle. Henderson is in New York. Martinez is on medical leave. I don't want excuses. I want a pilot. Ma'am, there's a Category 2 hurricane approaching Florida. Most pilots are refusing to. My mother is dying. The words cut through the hangar like a blade, silencing everyone within earshot. Alexandra's composure shattered right there in front of everyone. Her shoulders shook. Her hands trembled. For just a moment, the billionaire CEO became a daughter, terrified of losing her mother. She's in surgery right now. Cardiac bypass. If I don't get there. Her voice broke again. She turned away, pressed her hand against her mouth. James watched from the corridor, mop still in his hands, water still dripping. He had seen grief before. He had worn it like a second skin for years. He recognized it in the set of her shoulders, the way her breath came in shallow gasps, the desperate hope fighting against crushing fear. Miranda made call after call. Each one ended the same way. Unavailable. Booked solid. Can't fly into Miami today. Sorry, the weather's too dangerous. Ma'am, I've tried everyone. There's simply no one available. Alexandra's hands were shaking now, her perfect manicure forgotten as her fingers clenched and unclenched at her sides. There has to be someone. Anyone. Miranda looked at her tablet, then at Alexandra, her face pale with the helplessness of someone who had run out of options. Ma'am, there's no one. Every qualified pilot within 300 miles is either committed or refusing the flight. Silence, heavy, suffocating, final. James should have kept mopping, should have stayed invisible, should have remembered the promise he made to himself 8 years ago when he walked away from everything he had been. But his mouth opened before his brain could stop it. I can fly it. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Miranda turned first, her face twisted with disbelief that bordered on offense. The idea that this man, this nobody with a mop in his hands would dare to speak in such a moment was apparently beyond her comprehension. Excuse me. I can fly it. James stepped forward, setting down the mop. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. They were always steady when it mattered. The Gulfstream G700 in Bay 3, I can get her to Miami. Miranda laughed. Sharp, ugly, the kind of laugh designed to wound. The janitor wants to fly a $65 million aircraft. Stephanie, the other assistant, covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook with barely suppressed laughter. But Alexandra did not laugh. She walked toward James slowly, heels clicking against the polished concrete floor like a countdown. Each step brought her closer. Each step stripped away another layer of the anonymity he had built so carefully over 2 years. What did you say? I said I can fly it, ma'am. I have the hours. I have the certification. I can get you there. Alexandra stopped 3 feet away. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, the gray uniform, the worn shoes, the mop still dripping beside him, the calloused hands of a man who scrubbed toilets for a living. What's your name? James Carter. James Carter. She repeated it slowly, testing it, tasting it as if the syllables might reveal something about the man who spoke them. And where exactly did you learn to fly a Gulfstream? The moment stretched between them, taut as a wire. James felt the weight of every eye in the hangar upon him. Miranda's contempt. Stephanie's amusement. Frank Morrison, who had appeared in the doorway of the maintenance office, his weathered face unreadable. Air Force Test Pilot Division, 12 years. The laughter stopped. Miranda's smile froze on her face, uncertain now, searching for the punchline that wasn't coming. Stephanie straightened up, her amusement replaced by confusion. The entire hangar went silent. Alexandra's eyes narrowed, reassessing everything she thought she knew about the man standing before her. Test pilot. Yes, ma'am. You're telling me a former Air Force test pilot is mopping floors in my hangar? Yes, ma'am. Why? James did not answer, could not answer. The truth was too heavy, too raw, too soaked in blood and fire and screaming metal. The truth was a co-pilot's face asking what to do. The truth was a wife's casket lowered into the ground while a 4-year-old boy held his hand and asked when Mommy was coming back. I needed a job, he said finally. This one was available. Alexandra studied his face for a long moment, looking for the lie, looking for the joke. She found neither. Her expression shifted, the desperation returning. Her mother was dying. Her jet was grounded. And the only person offering to help was a man who cleaned her toilets. Let me make you an offer, James Carter. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, expensive, sharp, like everything about her. Fly this jet to Miami. Land it without a scratch. She paused, and the corner of her mouth curved into something cruel and cold, a defense mechanism wrapped in mockery. And I'll marry you. Miranda exploded with laughter. Stephanie doubled over. Even the security guard at the door cracked a smile. The joke spread through the hangar like wildfire. The janitor and the CEO, the mop pusher proposing to the billionaire heiress. It was absurd. It was ridiculous. It was exactly the kind of humiliation that put people in their place. James stood perfectly still. The laughter washed over him like a wave, hot and cruel, the familiar heat of being dismissed, of being nothing, of being invisible, even when standing right in front of someone. Alexandra's smile widened, cold, triumphant. Well, what do you say, Captain? She said the word captain like it was a curse, like it was the funniest thing she had ever heard. James felt something shift inside him, something he had buried 8 years ago, something he had locked away after the crash, after the funeral, after the second funeral. Marcus's voice echoed in his mind. What do we do, Captain? What do we do? And for the first time in 8 years, James had an answer. I say we should stop wasting time. Your mother's waiting. The laughter died. James met Alexandra's eyes, held them. There was no defiance in his gaze, no anger, no pride, just quiet certainty. The certainty of a man who had flown through things that would make most pilots wake up screaming. The certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose. He turned and walked toward Bay 3. Behind him, Miranda's voice rose to a shriek. Security! Someone stop him! He's delusional. But Frank Morrison stepped in front of the security guard, blocking his path with a body that had spent 40 years working on aircraft. Let him go. Frank, he's a janitor. I know exactly what he is. Frank's voice was steady, certain the voice of a man who had seen enough pilots to recognize one when he saw one. And I'm telling you, let him go. Miranda sputtered, her face turning red with outrage. You can't be serious. He's the only chance she's got. Alexandra watched the exchange, her face unreadable. The desperation was still there, buried beneath layers of doubt and disbelief. Her mother was dying. Her options had run out. And a janitor had just walked into her hangar and claimed he could fly a jet worth more than most people's lifetimes. Ma'am, please. Miranda's voice dropped to a pleading whisper. You can't seriously be considering this. It's insane. It's get my bag. What? My bag? The overnight bag. Get it now. Miranda's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face as the realization hit her. You're not actually going to... That's an order. Alexandra walked toward Bay 3, her heels clicking against the concrete. Each step was a decision. Each step was a gamble. Behind her, Miranda scrambled to comply, her protests dying on her lips. The Gulfstream G700 sat waiting in Bay 3, white and silver and gleaming under the hangar lights. $65 million of precision engineering, one of the finest private jets ever built. And a janitor was about to climb into its cockpit. James reached the boarding stairs and paused. The aircraft towered above him, familiar and foreign at the same time. He had not been inside a cockpit in 8 years, had not touched a set of controls, had not felt the throttle under his fingers or the yoke in his hands. For a moment, fear gripped him. Not the fear of flying that had never been the problem, the fear of what flying meant, the fear of who he used to be, the fear of remembering. Then he thought of Nathan, 6 years old, asking if his father had ever been a pilot. Looking at him with those eyes, Emily's eyes full of trust and hope and unconditional love. Some doors close for good reasons, Nathan. But some doors opened again when you least expected it. James climbed the stairs. The cockpit of the G700 was a symphony of technology. Glass panels covered every surface, displaying flight data, navigation systems, engine performance, weather radar. The seats were leather pristine, adjusted to factory default. The smell of new aircraft filled the space, that particular blend of fresh plastic, treated leather, and possibility that James had not experienced in almost a decade. His hands trembled as he lowered himself into the pilot's seat. 8 years. 8 years since he had sat in a position like this. 8 years since Marcus. The memory surged up unbidden, that young face, those terrified eyes, that voice asking what to do. James gripped the armrests, forcing the images down, forcing himself to focus on the present. Then his hands found the controls. Muscle memory took over. His fingers located the master switch before his conscious mind could tell them where it was. Battery on. APU start. Fuel pumps activated. The familiar dance of pre-flight checks began flowing through him like water through a cracked dam. The instruments came alive. Lights blinked on. Gauges stabilized. The primary flight display painted its picture of altitude heading airspeed all zeros, now but waiting. James heard footsteps behind him. Alexandra appeared in the cockpit doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide. She had changed out of her heels and into flats, a concession to practicality that seemed at odds with everything else about her. "You actually know what you're doing." It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She moved to the passenger cabin, sat down. The seatbelt clicked into place with a sound that seemed to echo through the aircraft. "If you crash my jet," she started. "I won't. If you crash my jet, I'll sue you for 3 lifetimes. "Understood." James reached for the radio. His voice came out different than it had for 2 years. Formal, professional. The voice of a man who used to command the sky. "Sterling Tower, this is November 7-7. Hotel Alpha requesting immediate departure clearance. Destination Miami International. Priority medical." Silence on the radio. Then, November 7-7. "Hotel Alpha, say again. Pilot identification." James paused. For 8 years he had been nobody. A ghost. A shadow mopping floors in a building full of people who never saw him. But not today. Captain James Carter, Air Force retired. ATP certification number Alpha Tango 7732. Another pause. He could imagine the confusion in the tower. A janitor claiming to be a retired Air Force captain. It sounded insane. It was insane. "Stand by, Hotel Alpha." James waited. His hands rested on the throttle. Behind him, Alexandra watched through the cockpit door. He could feel her eyes on his back, equal parts desperate hope and profound doubt. The radio crackled. "November 7-7, Hotel Alpha. You are cleared for immediate departure, runway 27, wind bearing 090 at 15 knots. Be advised Miami is reporting deteriorating conditions. Recommend caution." "Roger Tower, Hotel Alpha rolling." James pushed the throttle forward. The twin Rolls-Royce Pearl 700 engines responded with a roar that vibrated through the entire aircraft. 250 pounds of thrust on each side, enough power to push the $65 million machine from 0 to takeoff speed in seconds. The Gulf Stream began to move. James taxied toward the runway, his feet working the rudder pedals, his hands light on the controls. The aircraft responded to his inputs with precision, every system functioning exactly as designed. He ran through the final checks, automatically flight controls, trim flaps, instruments, engine parameters. Behind him, he heard Alexandra's breathing quicken. The runway stretched ahead, gray concrete, fading into the morning darkness. The windsock showed a mild crosswind from the east. Nothing serious. Nothing he couldn't handle. Hotel Alpha cleared for takeoff. Runway 27. Cleared for takeoff. Hotel Alpha. James aligned the aircraft with the center line. The runway light stretched before him like a path to somewhere else, somewhere he had not been in 8 years. He thought of Marcus, of Emily, of Nathan, waiting at home with Mrs. Patterson, not knowing his father was about to do something impossible. He thought of the man he used to be, the pilot, the captain, the person who had believed he could handle anything the sky threw at him. Maybe he still was that man. Maybe he had just forgotten. James pushed the throttle to maximum. The engines screamed. The aircraft lurched forward, pressing him back into the seat. The runway began to blur as the Gulf Stream accelerated 80 knots, 100, 120. V1, the point of no return. V2, rotation speed. James pulled back on the yoke. The wheels left the ground. and for the first time in 8 years, James Carter was flying. Chicago fell away beneath them. The Lake Michigan stretched out silver and vast in the early morning light. The buildings shrank to toys. The highways became ribbons of light. The world that had held him down for so long grew smaller and smaller until it was just a memory fading beneath the clouds. James leveled off at 12,000 feet, set the heading for Miami, checked the instruments. Everything was perfect. His hands were not shaking anymore. His breathing was steady. His mind was clear. This was where he belonged. He had forgotten. Or maybe he had forced himself to forget. Behind him, Alexandra sat in silence. Through the open cockpit door, he could see her reflection in the darkened window, a woman watching the ground disappear, watching her world transform, watching a janitor become something else entirely. On the tarmac far below, Miranda Collins stood with her phone in hand, her mouth open. Frank Morrison watched from the hangar door, arms crossed, a small smile on his weathered face. The jet climbed higher, punching through the scattered clouds. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful. It was familiar. It was everything James had given up and everything he had missed. The radio crackled, "Hotel Alpha contact Chicago Center on 132.45. Have a good flight." "Roger. Hotel Alpha switching. Thanks for the help." James changed frequencies, his movements automatic. The aircraft hummed around him, responsive to every input, eager to do what it had been built to do. Somewhere behind him, Alexandra Sterling was learning that the janitor she had mocked, the invisible man she had never noticed, the nobody she had offered to marry as a joke, was something else entirely. And ahead through the gathering clouds, a storm was waiting. But James Carter had flown through storms before. He had survived crashes and funerals and the kind of grief that would break most men. He had cleaned toilets and mopped floors and made himself invisible just to get through another day. This storm would not be the thing that stopped him. Nothing would ever stop him again. The Gulfstream G700 soared toward Miami at 500 knots, carrying a billionaire to her dying mother and a janitor back to the sky where he belonged. Neither of them knew what waited on the other side of those clouds. Neither of them knew that this flight would change everything. The clouds below them thickened as the Gulf Stream crossed into Tennessee airspace, gray and heavy with the promise of what waited further south. James checked the weather radar, a bloom of yellow and red spreading across the Florida peninsula like an infection. The hurricane had shifted course overnight, and Miami was directly in its path. Alexandra appeared in the cockpit doorway. She had unbuckled despite his earlier warning, and now she stood watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "You should stay seated, ma'am. We might hit turbulence." "I've flown 100 times. I'll risk it." She stepped into the cockpit and stood beside the co-pilot seat, but she did not sit. Her eyes moved across the instrument panel, the primary flight display, the navigation screen, the engine monitors with the careful attention of someone trying to understand a language she did not speak. "How long were you in the Air Force?" 12 years. "Test pilot the whole time." "Last 8 years. Before that, combat missions, 2 tours overseas, Iraq, Afghanistan, other places that don't make the news." Silence settled between them, broken only by the steady hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of the radio. James could feel her studying him, reassessing everything she thought she knew about the man who had mopped her floors for 2 years. "Why did you stop?" The question cut deeper than she could know. James's jaw tightened, his hands making a small adjustment to the autopilot heading. Things change. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Alexandra was quiet for a moment. Then she sat in the co-pilot seat carefully, like she was handling something fragile. The leather creaked under her weight. Through the windscreen, the clouds stretched endlessly in every direction, a white ocean suspended between earth and heaven. My father was a pilot. James glanced at her. First time. He flew commercial for 35 years, United. Captain Richard Sterling. Maybe you've heard of him. I have. He's a legend in aviation circles. His book on advanced instrument procedures saved my life more than once. Alexandra's eyebrows rose, genuine surprise breaking through her careful composure. You read my father's book 3 times. The chapter on crosswind techniques in particular. Required reading at Edwards, but most of us went back to it again and again. Something shifted in her expression, not quite warmth, but something close to it. A crack in the wall she had built around herself. He built this company when he retired. Handed it to me 5 years ago. She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the instrument panel. We haven't spoken since. Why not? Because I changed things, modernized, made decisions he didn't agree with. Her voice hardened, the old defensiveness returning. He called me ungrateful, said I was destroying his legacy. Were you? Alexandra turned to him, surprised by the directness. Most people did not challenge her. Most people said what they thought she wanted to hear. No, I was saving it. The company was hemorrhaging money when he handed it over. The fleet was outdated. Half our pilots were ready to retire with no replacements trained. If I hadn't acted, there wouldn't have been anything left to destroy. James nodded but said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was often more valuable than words. People filled silence with truth. He'll be at the hospital. My father. Alexandra's voice dropped, losing its edge. When I get there, first time I'll see him in 5 years, and it'll be because my mother might die. She won't. You don't know that. No. James checked the altitude, made another small adjustment. But I know something about waiting too long to see someone. And I know that the universe sometimes gives us chances we don't deserve. Alexandra stared at him, her eyes searching his face for something she could not name. That's a strange thing for a janitor to say. I'm not a janitor right now. No. Her voice softened, the first crack in her armor that she allowed him to see. I suppose you're not. They flew in silence for 20 minutes. The clouds below them continued to build gray and threatening. James monitored the weather radar constantly. The red blooms were spreading, the storm intensifying as they approached Florida airspace. We'll have a window, he said finally. Maybe 30 minutes once we start our approach. The weather's deteriorating, but Miami's still open. Barely. Can you do it? Yes. Alexandra accepted this without question. Something had changed in how she looked at him. The mockery was gone. The contempt had evaporated somewhere over Kentucky. In its place was something that might have been respect, or at least the beginning of it. Tell me something, Captain Carter. What? The truth. Why is a man with your skills cleaning toilets in my hangar? James's hands tightened on the yoke. The memory came without warning, ambushing him the way it always did when he let his guard down. Marcus's face, young, terrified. What do we do, Captain? What do we do? The alarm screaming. The aircraft spinning. the ground rushing up like death itself. "Captain," James blinked. The cockpit snapped back into focus. The instruments glowed steady green. The engines hummed their constant song. "I lost someone." The words came out rough scraped from somewhere deep inside him that he had kept locked away for 8 years. "A co-pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, 24 years old. First deployment in my unit. Eager, talented, reminded me of myself at that age." Alexandra did not speak. She simply listened, her body, still her eyes, fixed on his face. "We were testing a new flight system, high altitude, experimental fly-by-wire interface that was supposed to revolutionize military aviation." James's voice flattened, becoming mechanical, the only way he could tell the story. "Something went wrong with the primary flight controls. The system failed catastrophically. The aircraft entered an uncontrolled spin at 15,000 feet. What happened? I tried everything. Every recovery technique in the book and some that weren't. Full opposite rudder. Nose down to break the rotation. Cut the engines. Nothing worked. He could feel the yoke in his hands now, though his grip on the Gulfstream's controls remained light. We were falling at 6,000 feet per minute. The ground was coming up fast. How did you survive? I don't know. The admission cost him something. The spin broke at the last possible moment. I managed to convert our rotation into a dive and pulled up hard enough to pancake into a field instead of cratering. The aircraft was destroyed. I walked away with a concussion and cracked ribs. And Lieutenant Thompson. James was silent for a long moment. Through the windscreen, the clouds had grown darker, more menacing. The first hints of turbulence began to rock the aircraft. He didn't survive the impact. Head trauma when we hit the ground. The doctors said he was gone before the aircraft stopped moving. The cockpit felt smaller now, the air thinner. The investigation cleared me. Equipment failure. Nothing I could have done. They offered me my command back promotion commendations, the whole package. But you didn't take it? How could I? James's voice cracked for the first time. Every time I looked at a cockpit, I saw his face. Every time I touched the controls, I heard him asking me what to do, like I had the answer, like I could save him. He shook his head, a small defeated motion. I couldn't fly anymore, so I stopped. Alexandra processed this in silence. Her face had changed. The coldness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like understanding. And your wife? The assistants mentioned you're a single father. The familiar knife twisted in James's chest. Emily. Just her name hurt to say. We met in college. She was a teacher, 2nd grade, loved kids more than anything in the world. What happened to her? 3 years ago, driving home from work on a rainy night. Drunk driver crossed the median doing 60. His voice was flat, now empty. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. Nathan was 4 years old. He asked me every day for a month when Mommy was coming home. I'm sorry. Yeah. James stared at the horizon. Me too. So you lost your co-pilot, then your wife, and then I had a son to raise alone on a janitor's salary because I couldn't get back in the air. He exhaled slowly. That's the whole story. Not much of one. Alexandra leaned back in the co-pilot seat, let out a long breath. And I made a joke about marrying you. It was funny. It wasn't. Her voice was tight, strained with something that might have been shame. It was cruel. And I'm sorry. James looked at her, really looked, for the first time since they had taken off. He saw past the CEO, past the cold exterior, past the woman who had humiliated him in front of everyone. He saw a daughter rushing to her dying mother, a woman estranged from her father, someone carrying her own weight, her own grief, her own loneliness. Apology accepted. The radio crackled to life. November 7-7, Hotel Alpha Miami approach control. Be advised weather is deteriorating rapidly. Recommend immediate approach or divert to alternate. James keyed the mic. Roger, Miami. Hotel Alpha beginning descent. Request vectors for ILS runway 9 right. Hotel Alpha turn right, heading 140. Descend and maintain 3000. Expect ILS approach runway 9 right. Current weather visibility 1 mile in heavy rain. Wind 090 at 35. Gusting 45 ceiling, 300 broken. Alexandra returned to the passenger cabin and buckled in. Through the open cockpit door, James could see her gripping the armrests, her knuckles white. The aircraft entered the clouds. Turbulence hit hard. The Gulf Stream shuddered, bucked, dropped 50 feet in a heartbeat. Warning lights flickered across the instrument panel. Rain hammered the windscreen like gravel thrown by an angry god. James's hands moved constantly small corrections, continuous adjustments, fighting the wind that seemed determined to push them off course. The autopilot struggled to maintain heading, and he clicked it off, taking manual control. Some fights you had to handle yourself. Hotel Alpha. You're drifting left, of course. Turn right, heading 150. Right 150. He banked the aircraft, felt the wind grab the wings, and try to flip them. The artificial horizon showed 15 degrees of bank. The actual sensation was twice that. His inner ear screamed that they were falling. His training told him to trust the instruments. He trusted the instruments. The altitude unwound on the glass display. 3,000 feet. 2,000. 1,500. The radar altimeter counted down the distance between them and the invisible ground below. Hotel Alpha, you're cleared to land runway 9 right. Wind 090 at 35, gusting 45. RVR 2,400. 45 knots of crosswind, in rain, with visibility barely above minimums. The published crosswind limit for the G700 was 38 knots. He would be exceeding it by 7. This was the kind of landing that ended careers, or lives. James pushed the thought away. Hotel Alpha cleared to land. 500 feet. The rain was a solid wall of water. The ground proximity warning system announced their descent in its calm mechanical voice. 500. 300 feet. The aircraft bucked left. James corrected with right aileron and left rudder crabbing into the wind. 200 feet. The approach lights appeared through the murk, ghostly wavering like spirits guiding him home. Minimums. Minimums. 100 feet. James held the approach, his entire being focused on the instruments, on the feel of the aircraft, on the relationship between wind and wings that he had learned 30,000 hours ago. 50 feet. He kicked the rudder, aligning the nose with the center line while keeping the wings level against the crosswind. The aircraft yawed, fighting him. 20 feet. Flare. Reduce power. 10 feet. The main gear touched down harder than he would have liked, but controlled. The aircraft bounced once. James held it down with forward yoke pressure. The nose wheel slammed onto the concrete. Reverse thrust. Maximum braking. The engines roared in protest as they fought to slow $65 million of aircraft hurtling down a rain-slicked runway. The speed bled off. 200 knots, 150, 100, 50, 30. Stop. They were down. James taxied clear of the runway, his hands shaking now that the crisis had passed. Behind him, he heard Alexandra's ragged breathing. Hotel Alpha, turn left on taxiway Alpha. Contact ground on 121.9. Left on Alpha ground on 1219. Hotel Alpha. He made the turn, switched frequencies, requested gate assignment. The mundane tasks of arrival felt surreal after what they had just survived. The aircraft rolled to a stop at the private terminal. James shut down the engines. For a moment, he just sat there, hands still on the controls, heart pounding. He had done it. Alexandra appeared in the cockpit doorway. Her face was wet, not from rain, but from tears. That wasn't a landing. Her voice shook. That was a miracle. James unbuckled his harness, stood on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. It was physics. That's all. No. Alexandra stepped closer, close enough that he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, the mascara running beneath her eyes. That was something else. I've flown with dozens of pilots. Charter flights, corporate jets, everything. None of them could have done what you just did. James did not know how to respond, so he said nothing. Come with me. Where? To the hospital. She touched his arm the first time she had voluntarily touched him. Please. My mother's in surgery. My father will be there. And I... She stopped, took a breath, forced herself to continue. I don't want to face them alone. James looked at this woman. 12 hours ago, she had mocked him, made him a punchline, treated him like he was less than nothing. Now she was asking for his help. Now she was showing him her fear. He thought about Nathan, about Emily, about all the times he had faced the darkness alone because there was no one left to stand beside him. Let me secure the aircraft first. Alexandra nodded, wiped her eyes, walked to the exit. James began the shutdown checklist. His hands moved automatically, but his mind was somewhere else. On Marcus. On Emily. On the letter he had never opened. On the door that had just cracked open after 8 years of darkness. The hospital corridor smelled like bleach and fear. James walked beside Alexandra, still in his gray janitor's uniform. People stared, whispered. A man in work clothes next to a woman in a designer suit. They made no sense together. Alexandra did not seem to notice. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. She's in recovery. That's what they told me on the phone. Recovery. That's a good sign. Is it? If it wasn't, they would have said more. They reached the cardiac unit. A nurse directed them to room 412 at the end of the hall. Alexandra stopped outside the door. Her whole body went rigid, as if she had encountered an invisible wall. What's wrong? My father. Her voice was barely a whisper. I can hear him. James listened. A man's voice, deep and commanding, discussing medications and procedures with someone who responded in the measured tones of a physician. You haven't seen him in 5 years. No, he's probably scared too. Alexandra turned to him, her eyes wet. You don't know my father. Richard Sterling doesn't get scared. He gets angry. Sometimes that's the same thing. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she pushed open the door. The room was small white walls monitors beeping their steady rhythm. Catherine Sterling lay in the bed, pale but breathing tubes connecting her to machines that hummed and clicked. And standing beside her, his back to the door, was a tall man with silver hair and shoulders like a linebacker who had never stopped training. He turned at the sound. Richard Sterling had his daughter's eyes blue sharp as broken glass. He was 72 years old, but he still carried himself like the captain he had once been, like a man accustomed to commanding respect simply by existing. Alexandra. Dad. The word hung between them, heavy with 5 years of silence, 5 years of hurt, 5 years of words that could not be taken back. Richard's gaze shifted to James, scanning him head to toe, the uniform, the work boots, the calloused hands. Who the hell is this? This is Captain James Carter. He flew me here. Captain? Richard's eyebrows rose. In that outfit? It's a long story. I'm sure it is. Richard's tone carried dismissal, the instinctive response of a man who sorted people into categories within seconds of meeting them. Alexandra moved to her mother's bedside, took her hand. How is she? Surgery went well. 4 bypasses. She'll need months of recovery, but the surgeon says she'll make it. Thank God. God had nothing to do with it. The surgeon did. Alexandra closed her eyes. James could see her fighting for control, fighting not to shatter in front of the man who had raised her. I'm glad she's okay, Dad. Are you? Richard turned to face her fully, his voice rising. Is that why you haven't visited in 5 years? Why you missed her birthday 3 times? Why she cries every time your name comes up? Dad, please, no. Richard stepped toward her. You don't get to walk in here and pretend everything's fine. You abandoned this family for your career, for that company, for... I didn't abandon anyone. You pushed me away. I told you the truth. I told you that you were destroying everything I built. I was saving it. Alexandra's voice cracked. The company was bleeding money. The fleet was obsolete. If I hadn't, enough. The word came from the bed. Weak, raspy, but firm. Catherine Sterling's eyes were open. She looked between her husband and daughter with an expression that brooked no argument. Both of you, stop. Alexandra dropped to her knees beside the bed. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have... Hush. Catherine's hand found her daughter's cheek. You're here now. That's what matters. Richard stood rigid, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. But something had broken in his face, just for a second, just a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. Catherine looked at him. Richard, sit down. I'm fine standing. I almost died. Sit down. The command in her voice was unmistakable. Richard pulled a chair beside the bed and sat heavily, like a man who had been carrying too much weight for too long. Catherine's eyes moved to James, still standing by the door, still invisible to everyone except the woman who had nearly died. And who is this young man? Captain Carter, Alexandra said. He flew me here through a hurricane. Catherine's eyebrows rose. Through a hurricane. The weather was deteriorating. We had a window. I took it. He landed in 45-knot crosswinds. Alexandra's voice carried something that had not been there before, something like awe. In 0 visibility. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. Richard's head turned. His eyes narrowed, the dismissal gone, replaced by something sharper, the look of one pilot assessing another. What aircraft? Gulfstream G700. Crosswind limit on a G700 is 38 knots. I know. You exceeded it by 7. Yes, sir. Silence stretched between them. Richard studied James with new interest, the same way a craftsman studies unexpected quality in another's work. Where did you train? Edwards Air Force Base, Test Pilot School, class of '09. Richard's expression shifted. Something moved behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory. Edwards. I lectured there in '07 and '08. Guest instructor for advanced instrument procedures. I know. I read your book. Flying the Edge required reading for the program. You read my book. 3 times. The chapter on crosswind techniques saved my life more than once. For the first time, Richard almost smiled. And now you're flying my daughter around in a janitor's uniform. It's complicated. I imagine it is. Catherine cleared her throat. Richard, leave the poor man alone. She looked at James with tired but grateful eyes. Thank you for bringing my daughter home. It's been too long. You should rest, ma'am. I intend to. Her gaze moved to Alexandra. But first, Alexandra, stay. Talk to your father. Really talk. Mom. For me, please. Alexandra looked at Richard. He looked at her. 5 years of silence. 5 years of hurt. 5 years of pride standing between them like a wall. I'll be in the waiting room, James said. He left before anyone could respond. The waiting room was empty except for an old television playing news nobody was watching. James sat in a plastic chair, stretched his legs, let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. His phone buzzed a text from Mrs. Patterson. Nathan asking when you'll be home. Everything okay? He typed back. Flight ran long. Might be tomorrow. Okay to stay. Of course, he's already asleep. Be safe. James stared at the phone. His son's face smiled at him from the lock screen, gap-toothed perfect. A school photo from last spring when Nathan had insisted on wearing his favorite dinosaur shirt despite James's suggestion that maybe a collared shirt would be better. What was he doing here, 1,000 miles from home? In a hospital waiting room, for a woman who had humiliated him 12 hours ago. But something had shifted on that flight. Something he could not name. Something that felt like the first crack of sunlight after years of darkness. He closed his eyes. Just for a minute. The dream came immediately. Marcus's face, young, terrified. What do we do, Captain? What do we do? The alarm screaming. The ground rushing up. The sound of metal tearing. The smell of fuel and blood and fear. James. He jerked awake. Alexandra stood in front of him, her makeup smeared, her eyes red. You were talking in your sleep. James rubbed his face, trying to shake off the remnants of the nightmare. Bad dream. The crash. He did not answer, did not need to. Alexandra sat in the chair beside him. The plastic creaked under her weight. Outside, the rain had stopped, but water still streamed down the windows in silver rivulets. We talked, my father and I. And it was hard. We said things, honest things. She paused. He cried. I've never seen my father cry. Not once in 43 years. First time for everything. I'm staying the night. Maybe a few days until she's stable. Okay. The jet needs to go back to Chicago. The company needs it. James nodded. I can fly it back. That's not what I'm asking. Alexandra turned to face him fully. I'm asking you to stay. James blinked. Stay here in Miami until I'm ready to go back. Ms. Sterling. Alexandra, please. Alexandra, I have a son at home. I know. I'll arrange for him to come here. Mrs. Patterson, too, if she's willing. First-class flights, hotel suite, whatever they need. Why? Alexandra was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the floor. Because for the first time in 5 years, I feel like something might be okay. And you're part of that. She looked up at him. We met 12 hours ago. And in those 12 hours, you've shown me more about courage and integrity than anyone has in years. James did not know what to say. I meant what I said on the jet, about owing you an apology, about being cruel. You already apologized. Words are cheap. She reached into her bag, pulled out a folded paper. I want to do something real. When we get back to Chicago, I want you to read this." James took the paper but did not open it. "What is it?" "A job offer. Senior pilot position with Sterling Aviation. Salary, benefits, the works." His chest tightened. "I'm a janitor." "You're a test pilot who's been hiding for 8 years. There's a difference. I can't fly anymore." "You flew today." "That was different." "How?" James looked at the paper in his hands, felt its weight heavier than it should have been. "When I quit, I made a promise to myself. No more cockpits, no more risking leaving Nathan alone. And mopping floors is safer." "It doesn't kill people." Alexandra's voice softened. "James, what happened to Lieutenant Thompson that wasn't your fault?" "Everyone keeps saying that." "Because it's true." "Then why does it feel like a lie?" The question hung between them, raw, honest, unanswered. Alexandra had no answer. No one ever did. James stood. "I should find a hotel. Stay at my father's place." "Your father?" "He offered. Wants to talk to you about Edwards, about flying." She paused. "About what it takes to come back from losing someone in the air." James went still. "Your father lost someone. His co-pilot, 1987, engine fire over the Pacific, Mike Patterson. They'd been flying together for 15 years. The information settled into James like a stone dropped into still water. Dad didn't fly for 2 years after that. Then he came back, flew for another 25 years without a single incident." "How?" "He said he realized something, that Mike wouldn't want him to stop, that the best way to honor him was to keep flying, to be better, to save the lives Mike couldn't." Alexandra's voice dropped. "Maybe he can tell you himself." James looked at her. This woman he had known for less than a day, who somehow understood things about him he had never told anyone. "One night." The words came out before he could stop them. "I'll stay one night." Alexandra smiled, small, genuine, the first real smile he had seen from her. One night. Richard Sterling's house was a sprawling ranch on the outskirts of Miami, white walls and tile floors, aviation memorabilia covering every available surface. Model aircraft hung from the ceiling of the study. Photographs lined the walls, Richard in his United uniform. Richard shaking hands with presidents and CEOs. Richard standing beside aircraft of every era. James stood in the guest room examining a framed photograph of a younger Richard beside a Cessna 172. The man in the picture was smiling his arm around another pilot whose face had been weathered by years of sun and wind. A knock on the door. "Come in." Richard entered. He had changed out of his suit into khakis and a polo shirt, looking almost human without the armor of formal attire. "Getting settled." "Yes, sir. Thank you for the hospitality." "Drop the sir. You're not in the military anymore." Richard moved to the window, looked out at the darkness beyond. "Alexandra told me about your co-pilot, Lieutenant Thompson." James tensed. The mention of Marcus's name still felt like touching a live wire. "She told me about the crash, about why you stopped flying." "It's not a secret." "No, but it's not something you talk about either, is it?" James said nothing. Richard turned from the window. His eyes held something that James had not expected recognition, understanding. "I had a co-pilot once, Mike Patterson, best pilot I ever knew. Better than me, if I'm honest." Richard's voice carried the weight of decades. "We flew together for 15 years, 2 million miles, through storms, mechanical failures, everything the sky could throw at us." "What happened?" "Engine fire over the Pacific, 1987. We were 6 hours from land flying a 747 full of passengers when the number 3 engine went up like a Roman candle. Richard's jaw tightened. Fire suppression failed. The wing was burning. We had to shut down the engine and pray we could make it to Hawaii on the remaining 3. James listened, his own breathing slow and controlled. We made it. Landed at Honolulu with fire trucks chasing us down the runway. All 342 passengers walked off that aircraft without a scratch. And Mike, Richard's voice cracked just slightly, just enough to show the man beneath the legend. He had a heart attack in the cockpit. The stress was too much. He was 52 years old, healthy as a horse, but his heart just stopped. Silence filled the room. He died saving those people. Died with his hands on the controls, doing the job he loved. Richard picked up the photograph from the desk, the one of him and Mike beside the Cessna. I wanted to die too after that. I couldn't look at a cockpit without seeing his face. Couldn't touch the controls without hearing his voice. Sound familiar? James nodded slowly. I didn't fly for 2 years. Took a desk job, pushed papers, died a little more every day. Richard set the photo down. Then his wife showed up at my door. His wife, Maria, 3 months after the crash. I thought she was going to scream at me, blame me. I was ready for it. Hell, I wanted it. What did she do? She hugged me. Told me Mike would be furious if I quit flying. Said he'd haunt me for the rest of my life if I wasted the gift he saw in me. Richard's eyes met James's. She was right. Mike would have been furious. He loved flying more than anything except Maria. To throw that away because of grief, it would have been an insult to everything he believed in. James absorbed this. Let it settle. My wife believed the same thing. Emily. Alexandra told you. She mentioned. Richard's voice softened. I'm sorry for your loss. Both of them. Yeah. James looked at his hands. Me too. So you lost your co-pilot, then your wife, and then I had a son to raise alone, and I couldn't get back in the air. Richard nodded slowly. She left me a letter. The words came out before James could stop them. Emily. I found it after the funeral. Never opened it. Why not? Because I knew what it would say. That I should fly again. That I should stop hiding. That Nathan needed to see his father whole. James's voice cracked, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Are you ready now? The question cut deep. Deeper than anything Alexandra had asked, deeper than anything James had asked himself. I don't know. Then maybe it's time to find out. Richard walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Get some sleep, Captain. Tomorrow, if you want, I'll show you something. What? Richard smiled, the first genuine smile James had seen from him. The first aircraft I flew after Mike died. I keep it in the hangar out back. Old Cessna 172. Nothing fancy. But it's where I learned that flying isn't about forgetting the dead. It's about honoring them. He left. James stood alone in the guest room. The photographs stared down at him. All those pilots, all those flights, all those lives lived in the sky. He pulled out his phone, found Mrs. Patterson's number. Can you do something for me? Of course. What do you need? In my bedroom, top dresser drawer, there's a white envelope. Emily's handwriting on the front. Silence on the other end. Can you take a picture and send it to me? Of course. Give me 5 minutes. James sat on the bed and waited. His phone buzzed. The picture was blurry, but he could read Emily's handwriting. For James, when you're ready. He stared at it for a long time, traced the letters with his eyes. her handwriting, her words, her love still reaching out from beyond the grave. Then he typed, "Don't open it. I'll read it when I get home. But thank you." Is everything okay? James thought about it, about the flight, about Alexandra, about Richard, about the door that had cracked open after 8 years of darkness. I think it might be. For the first time in a long time. The Cessna was older than James. Richard pulled back the hangar doors the next morning, revealing a white and blue aircraft that looked like it belonged in a museum. The paint was faded but clean. The propeller gleamed. The windows were polished to a shine. 1965, Richard said, running his hand along the wing like he was greeting an old friend. Bought her the day after Mike's funeral. Flew her for the first time 3 weeks later. 3 weeks! Couldn't do it sooner. Kept walking to the hangar, sitting in the cockpit, then walking away. Richard opened the cockpit door. But eventually, the need to fly was stronger than the fear. James walked around the aircraft. His trained eye noted the condition of the control surfaces, the tires, the general state of maintenance. She's still airworthy. Annual inspection last month. Flies like a dream. Why keep her? Because she reminds me. Richard gestured to the pilot's seat. Every time I look at her, I remember what it felt like to be so broken I couldn't move. And then I remember what it felt like to move anyway. Get in, James hesitated. This isn't a G700. No autopilot, no fancy instruments. Just you and the sky. Richard's voice was firm. If you can fly this, you can fly anything. James climbed into the left seat. The cockpit was cramped basic gauges, analog everything. No glass cockpit, no flight management system, just steam gauges and a yoke that felt solid under his hands. Richard settled into the right seat. I'm not checked out on light aircraft anymore. I am. I'll handle the legal side. You just fly. James looked at the instrument panel. Simple, honest, nothing to hide behind. Start the checklist. James's hands moved. Muscle memory from decades ago. Master switch, fuel selector, mixture rich. Prime the engine. Clear prop. He turned the key. The Continental engine coughed, sputtered, caught. The propeller spun into a blur. The sound was different from a jet, rougher, more immediate. He could feel every cylinder firing every revolution of the prop. Taxi to runway 24. James released the brakes. The Cessna rolled forward, responsive to his inputs on the rudder pedals. They reached the runway empty, except for them. Your aircraft! James pushed the throttle forward. The engine roared a small roar, nothing like a jet, but real alive. The Cessna accelerated. 50 knots, 60, 70. James pulled back on the yoke. The wheels left the ground. And suddenly, everything changed. The noise fell away. The weight lifted. The horizon stretched infinite in every direction. James climbed. 500 feet. 1,000. 1,500. Below Miami spread out in morning light. The ocean glittered. The Everglades stretched green and endless. How does it feel? James could not answer. His throat was too tight. His vision was blurring. First time I flew after Mike, Richard said, I cried for 20 minutes. Just circled the field crying like a baby. Couldn't help it. James blinked. Tears ran down his cheeks. There's no shame in it. You're not just flying. You're coming home. James leveled off at 3,000 feet. The Cessna hummed steady and faithful. I've been so angry. The words came without planning. At the aircraft that killed Marcus. At the drunk driver who killed Emily. At God, the universe, whatever. Just angry. Anger's easy. It's a wall you can hide behind. I know, but I didn't know how to stop. You don't stop. Richard pointed out the window. See that cloud? The one shaped like a fist. James looked. A cumulus formation. Tight. Dense. Ready to explode. That's what anger looks like. Compressed volatile waiting to release. Richard pointed higher. Now look at that one. The thin, stretched one. A cirrus cloud. Wispy. Spread across the sky. That's what anger becomes when you let it go. It doesn't disappear. It just expands, becomes part of something bigger. James watched the clouds, the fist, the wisp. How long did it take you to transform it? Years, and I'm still working on it. Richard shrugged. But that's the point. It's not about finishing. It's about trying. Every day, every flight. James turned the Cessna banked gently. The wing dipped toward the ocean. My son doesn't know I can fly. I never told him. Why not? Because if he knew, he'd want me to do it, and I wasn't ready to explain why I couldn't. Maybe it's time to show him instead of explaining. James thought about Nathan, 6 years old, asking about airplanes, asking if his father was ever a pilot. Emily left me that letter. She wrote it before she died. Smart woman. The smartest. James's voice broke slightly. She saw things in me I couldn't see in myself. That's what good partners do. They hold the vision when we lose it. They flew in silence for a while. The Cessna carved through the morning air smooth pure. I want to read the letter, James said finally. When I get home, I want to read it. Good. And I want to think about Alexandra's offer, the pilot position. Even better. James looked at Richard. You're her father. Shouldn't you be warning me off, telling me I'm not good enough? Richard laughed, the first real laugh. Son, I watched you land a G700 in conditions that would have made most pilots wet themselves. My daughter trusts you. My wife likes you. And you read my book 3 times. He shook his head. If anything, I should be warning her that you're too good. James almost smiled. Take us back, Richard said. And when we land, I'll tell you something about Alexandra. Something that might help you understand why she needs someone like you. That night, after James had returned to Chicago, after Mrs. Patterson had gone home, and Nathan had fallen asleep, James sat on his bed with the white envelope in his hands. Emily's handwriting. Clear and familiar. So achingly familiar that his chest hurt just looking at it. For James, when you're ready. His hand shook as he opened it. 3 pages. Her neat handwriting filling each one. He began to read. My love, if you're reading this, it means 2 things. First, that something has happened to me. Second, that you're finally ready to hear what I've been wanting to tell you for years. I know you stopped flying because of Marcus. I know you blame yourself, even though everyone says it wasn't your fault. And I know that no matter what I say, you'll carry that weight until you decide to set it down. But here's what I need you to understand. You are not your worst moment. You are not the crash. You are not the failure. You are the man who held me when I cried. The man who stayed up all night with Nathan when he was sick. The man who works a job he hates just to keep us safe. You are brave. You are strong. You are exactly the man I fell in love with. Tears fell onto the paper. James wiped his eyes and kept reading. And one day when you're ready, I need you to fly again. Not for me. For Nathan. He needs to see his father whole. He needs to know that mistakes don't define us. That failure isn't final. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward anyway. I wish I could be there when you get back in the cockpit. I wish I could see your face when you remember who you really are. But if I can't, I need you to know this. I am so proud of you. Not for what you achieve, but for who you are. For the man who keeps trying even when it hurts. For the father who loves our son more than anything. For the pilot who will fly again when the time is right. The sky is waiting for you, baby. And so is the life you deserve. All my love forever and always, Emily P.S. When you tell Nathan about your flying days, tell him I knew you'd find your way back. Tell him his daddy is a hero. Not because he never falls, but because he always gets back up. James read the letter again, and again, and a third time. By the second reading, the tears had slowed. By the third, he understood what she had been trying to tell him. He was not broken. He had never been broken. He had just been waiting for permission, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone to tell him it was okay to live again. Emily had given him that permission 3 years ago. In a letter he had been too afraid to open. He set the letter down and walked to Nathan's room. His son lay curled on his side, the stuffed elephant tucked under his arm. James sat on the edge of the bed. "Nathan, wake up, buddy." Nathan's eyes fluttered open. "Dad, you're home." "I'm home, and I have to tell you something." Nathan sat up, rubbed his eyes. "I used to be a pilot, a long time ago. Before you were born. I flew jets, big ones, fast ones." Nathan's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? But something bad happened and I stopped flying. I was scared. Scared of what? Of flying again. Of losing people I love. Of not being there for you." Nathan was quiet, processing. "But you flew to Miami. Mrs. Patterson told me you flew a big plane in a storm." "I did." "So you're not scared anymore?" James considered the question, really considered it. "I'm still scared, but I'm going to try anyway." Nathan smiled, that gap-toothed grin that looked so much like Emily. "Mom said you would." James's heart stopped. "What, before she went to heaven, she told me you used to fly, that one day you'd fly again. She said I should be proud of you when it happened." James pulled his son close, held him tight. "Are you proud of me?" "Yeah, Dad." Nathan's arms wrapped around his neck. "I'm super proud." 1 week later, Miranda Collins made her move. James arrived at the Sterling hangar to find a crowd gathered around the main television in the briefing room. The news anchor's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Former janitor at Sterling Aviation, now set to represent the company at the World Aviation Expo in Dubai. Sources claim that Carter left the Air Force under mysterious circumstances following a fatal crash. The footage cut to a photograph. Young official. A military portrait. Marcus Thompson. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, killed during a test flight, was reportedly under Carter's command. Questions are being raised about whether Carter is truly qualified for this high-profile assignment. James could not breathe. Frank Morrison pushed through the crowd and turned off the television. Everyone back to work, now. The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly. Their eyes lingered on James. Alexandra appeared beside him, her face pale. "My office, now." She closed the door behind them. "Miranda. She's the only one who would leak this, the only one with access to your personnel file." Alexandra's hands were shaking. "I'll fire her today." "Don't." "What? Don't fire her." James's voice was calm. "She told the truth. I was Marcus's commanding officer. He did die under my watch. Those are facts. But the way she presented them doesn't matter. The story's out. Firing her now will look like we're covering something up. They'll dig deeper. Find more. Make it worse." Alexandra stared at him. You're protecting her. I'm protecting you, and Sterling, and everything we're trying to build. James met her eyes. If you fire her now, the media will say you're hiding something. They'll turn this into a scandal instead of a story. So what do? We tell the truth, all of it. The equipment failure, the investigation, the findings that cleared me, everything. That's risky. That's honest. And honest is all I have. Alexandra was quiet for a long moment. The press conference is in 2 hours. Are you ready? No, but I'll do it anyway. Why? Because that's what brave people do. Because that's what my son needs to see. Because that's what Emily would have wanted. Alexandra nodded slowly, took his hand. I'll be right beside you. I know. The press conference was chaos. 50 reporters, 100 cameras, questions shouted from every direction. But James stood at the podium flanked by Alexandra and Richard Sterling and told the truth. All of it. The crash, the investigation, the grief, the years of hiding. When it was over, when the cameras had stopped flashing and the reporters had run out of questions, he walked out of the room feeling empty and full at the same time. Dubai was still on. The story was out. And James Carter was finally ready to fly again. 3 days after the press conference, Miranda Collins cleaned out her desk. She had not been fired. Alexandra had offered her a choice: resign quietly with a severance package or face a formal investigation into how confidential personnel files had been leaked to the media. The choice was obvious. James watched from across the hangar as she carried a cardboard box toward the exit. 10 years of climbing, scheming, stepping on everyone who stood in her way, all of it reduced to a single box of personal belongings and a resignation letter that would never mention the real reason she left. Their eyes met for just a moment. He expected to see hatred there, or at least defiance. The Miranda Collins he had known for 2 years would have glared at him, would have found some way to make him feel small, even in defeat. She had spilled coffee on him dozens of times, had laughed at him, had tried to destroy everything he was building. Instead, he saw something smaller, something broken. She had gambled everything on destroying him, leaked the story about Marcus to reporters who would twist it into scandal, waited for the public to turn on him, for Alexandra to abandon him, for his second chance to crumble into dust. And she had lost. Not because James had fought back, not because he had exposed her or sought revenge. She had lost because the truth, the full truth, told honestly and without shame, was stronger than any lie she could construct. Miranda paused at the door. Her hand rested on the frame for a moment, fingers tracing the metal like she was saying goodbye to something she would never touch again. Then she looked back one final time at the building where she had spent a decade of her life. The hangar was busy. Mechanics working on aircraft, pilots reviewing flight plans, the ordinary chaos of a company that had survived her betrayal and moved on without her. No one else was watching her leave. No one else cared. That perhaps was the cruelest punishment of all. She walked out into the Chicago morning and disappeared. Frank Morrison appeared beside James, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. You could have had her prosecuted. Leaking personnel files is a federal offense, especially military records. What would that prove? That actions have consequences. James shook his head slowly. The anger he had expected to feel the satisfaction of watching his enemy fall simply was not there. All he felt was tired. Tired of grudges. tired of the weight of other people's cruelty. She already learned that. Some lessons don't need to be taught twice. Frank studied him for a moment, his weathered face unreadable. Most men in your position would want blood. She tried to end you. She tried. She failed. James turned back toward the training facility, toward the simulator that was waiting toward the future that was finally beginning to take shape. I've got better things to do than watch someone else suffer. You're a better man than most, Captain. No. James paused, looked back at the door where Miranda had stood. I'm just tired of carrying anger. It's heavy. And I've been carrying enough weight for 8 years. Frank nodded slowly, the kind of nod that said he understood more than words could express. Come on, then. He clapped James on the shoulder. You've got a spiral to learn, and from what I hear, it's going to take everything you've got. James allowed himself a small smile. Then I'd better get started. The weeks before Dubai disappeared in a blur of simulator sessions, flight manuals, and sleepless nights. James reported to the Sterling training facility at 5 each morning before the sun had cleared the Chicago skyline. Commander Lisa Brooks, a former Navy pilot with 17 years of carrier landings behind her, had designed a regimen that would have broken most pilots. 6 hours in the full-motion simulator, 2 hours of physical conditioning, 4 hours of flight theory and emergency procedures. No days off, no mercy. Dubai isn't a vacation, she told him on the first day, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had landed jets on pitching decks in the middle of typhoons. It's a performance. Every pilot in the world will be watching. Every mistake will be analyzed. Every success will be questioned. I understand. Do you? Because if you're not ready, you'll embarrass yourself, embarrass Sterling, and embarrass everyone who believed in you. I won't embarrass anyone. Prove it. He proved it. Day after day. Flight after flight. The simulator was state-of-the-art, a perfect replica of the G700 cockpit mounted on hydraulic systems that mimicked every sensation of actual flight. James strapped in each morning knowing that the next 6 hours would push him to his limits. Commander Brooks sat beside him calling out scenarios, failures, emergencies, an endless parade of things that could go wrong at 40,000 feet. Engine fire at V1, hydraulic failure on approach, complete electrical failure over the Atlantic, dual engine flameout at cruise altitude, wind shear on a final. Every nightmare scenario that aviation engineers could imagine James faced in that simulator. He failed his first simulated emergency approach, and his second, and his third. You're thinking too much. Commander Brooks's voice cut through his frustration. Your hands know what to do. Your brain is getting in the way. I'm trying. Stop trying. Start trusting. Easier said than done. Every time James touched the controls, Marcus's face flashed in his mind. Every alarm triggered memories of screaming metal and spinning horizons. The past refused to stay buried. But somewhere around the second week, something shifted. James stopped fighting his instincts. Let his hands move without conscious direction. The simulator responded. The failures became fewer. The recoveries became faster. Commander Brooks noticed. Whatever you did over the weekend, keep doing it. I stopped thinking. Best thing a pilot can do. By the end of week 3, James was passing standard procedures consistently. Takeoffs, landings, navigation, emergency descents, all within parameters. The muscle memory he had buried for 8 years was returning stronger than before. But the real test was coming. Everyone knew it. The Sterling spiral. Alexandra called him into her office 3 days before departure. The view from the 40th floor stretched across Chicago's skyline glass towers, reflecting the afternoon sun. She stood by the window tablet in hand flight plans spread across the conference table behind her. "There's an opportunity," she said without preamble. "The World Aviation Expo in Dubai. They want a demonstration pilot, someone who can showcase precision flying for international clients. And you want me. Orion Industries wants you. They saw the footage from Miami." James blinked. "What footage?" "The tower recorded your approach. 45-knot crosswinds, zero visibility, perfect landing." Alexandra pulled up a video on her tablet. Grainy footage from a camera mounted on the control tower showing the Gulf Stream descending through sheets of rain. It went viral in aviation circles, 3 million views, and counting. James watched himself land the aircraft. From the outside, it looked smooth, effortless. He remembered it feeling like barely controlled chaos. "I didn't know. That's what makes it impressive. You weren't performing. You were just flying." She paused, her expression shifting to something more serious. "There's one more thing. The Sterling spiral." James sat forward. He had heard of it. Every pilot who had studied Richard Sterling's career knew about his signature maneuver, but he had never seen it performed. "My father designed it in 1985. No one's flown it since he retired. It's a continuous ascending spiral that ends in a vertical stall turn." Alexandra pulled up another video. Old footage, grainy and washed out. A younger Richard Sterling at the controls. "Watch." The aircraft on screen entered a gentle bank, then began to climb. But instead of leveling off it, continued turning, the spiral tightening with each revolution. Higher and higher, the bank angle increasing until the aircraft seemed to hang motionless at the top of the corkscrew. Then the pivot. A perfect rotation around the vertical axis nose, dropping controlled dive smooth recovery. James exhaled slowly. "That's not possible." "My father did it 237 times. Never failed once. And you want me to do it?" "I want you to try. If you can't, we'll substitute another finale." Alexandra's eyes were bright. "But if you can pull it off, it'll be the story of the century. The janitor who flew the Sterling spiral." James looked at the footage again. The physics involved, the precision required, the margin for error that simply did not exist. "I'll need to practice. We have 3 days. Then I'd better start now." The next 72 hours were the hardest of James's life. The Sterling spiral required perfect control at every moment. Entry speed had to be exactly 180 knots too slow, and the aircraft would stall prematurely. Too fast, and the spiral would widen into uselessness. Bank angle had to increase gradually from 30 degrees to 60, then beyond, pushing the aircraft to the edge of its performance envelope. G-loading peaked at 4.5 times normal gravity, enough to gray out an unprepared pilot. And then the pivot. The moment when the aircraft hung suspended at the top of the climb, airspeed approaching zero, requiring full rudder input to rotate the nose 180 degrees before gravity reasserted itself. James failed his first attempt. The spiral widened at the halfway point, his entry speed too high. He failed his second. The bank angle increased too quickly, the aircraft threatening to depart controlled flight. He failed his 10th, his 15th, his 20th. Commander Brooks watched with growing concern. "Maybe we should go with the backup finale." "No." "James, I said no. I can do this." "You failed 22 times. Then I'll fail 22 more, and then I'll succeed." He climbed back into the simulator, reset the scenario, began again. Entry 180 knots exactly. Bank angle 30 degrees. Spiral initiated. The aircraft began to climb, turning the artificial horizon tilting as the bank increased. James felt the G-forces building, simulated, but his body responded as if they were real. His vision narrowed. His breathing became controlled, deliberate. 40 degrees of bank. 50. The spiral tightened. Marcus's voice echoed in his mind, but different this time. Not panicked, not asking questions, just present, calm, watching. Nice recovery there, Captain. James almost smiled. 60 degrees of bank. The aircraft was corkscrewing upward now, the altimeter spinning the airspeed, bleeding off exactly as planned. The apex approached. The moment of truth. James felt the aircraft begin to slow. The edge of the stall. The point of no return. Now. He kicked, full rudder pulled the yoke. The aircraft pivoted nose, rotating around the vertical axis, hanging motionless for one impossible moment before gravity took over. The dive. Nose dropping, airspeed building. James held the descent longer than felt safe, longer than seemed possible. At the last moment, he pulled back. The aircraft leveled. The recovery was complete. The Sterling spiral. Perfect. Commander Brooks's voice came through the headset quiet with something that might have been awe. Time 4 minutes, 12 seconds. All parameters within tolerance. A pause. My God, you actually did it. James sat back in the seat, his hands trembling with the aftershock of concentration. Again? What? I need to do it again. Make sure it wasn't luck. He did it again. And again. And 5 more times. Each one perfect. By the time he climbed out of the simulator, his flight suit was soaked with sweat, his arms trembling, his vision blurry. But he was smiling. Alexandra was waiting outside. I heard. They said you did something impossible 7 times in a row. It's not impossible. Your father did it. My father trained for months. You did it in 3 days. She stepped closer. How do you feel? James considered the question. Like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be. The flight to Dubai was 14 hours of anticipation and preparation. Nathan sat beside the window for the first 3 hours, his face pressed against the glass, watching the clouds scroll past below them. Then he fell asleep, his head on Mrs. Patterson's shoulder while she worked on her knitting a scarf that was becoming longer by the hour. James sat across the aisle from Alexandra. Neither of them slept. Nervous? She asked. Terrified. You don't look terrified. I've had a lot of practice hiding it. She smiled, that small, genuine expression that transformed her entire face. Tell me something I don't know about you. Like what? Anything. Something real. Something you don't tell people. James thought about it. The hum of their engines filled the silence between them. I talk to Marcus sometimes, in my head, during flights. Your co-pilot who died. Yeah, he started out as a ghost, haunting me, asking what to do when everything went wrong. James paused, but somewhere along the way he changed. Now he's more like a friend, commenting on my flying, telling me when I'm doing well. That's not crazy, that's beautiful. Most people would think I'm losing my mind. Most people haven't lost what you've lost. Alexandra's hand found his across the armrest. The people we love don't really leave us. They just change how they stay. James looked at her. This woman he had known for less than a month, who somehow understood things about him that he had never told anyone. Where did that come from? My grandmother. Before she died, she said, love doesn't end with death. It transforms. becomes something we carry instead of something we hold. She sounds wise. She was. I miss her every day. They sat in silence for a while. The aircraft hummed around them. The darkness of the Atlantic passed below. James, yeah, whatever happens in Dubai, whatever happens after. Alexandra squeezed his hand. I want you to know something. What? You've already changed everything. Not just for me, for everyone at Sterling. For every person who's ever been told they're not enough. She paused. You proved that second chances are real. That's worth more than any demonstration. James did not know how to respond, so he just held her hand. They stayed like that until dawn broke over the Persian Gulf. Dubai was overwhelming. The heat hit James like a physical force the moment he stepped off the aircraft. 108 degrees. The air shimmered. The buildings stretched toward the sky like fingers of glass and steel monuments to ambition and unlimited resources. Nathan's eyes went wide. Dad, this place is huge. Yeah, buddy, it is. Are you going to fly over all of it? Some of it. Cool. The exhibition grounds sprawled across an area the size of a small city. Aircraft from every nation filled the display areas, military jets, commercial airliners, experimental designs, helicopters of every shape and size. The Sterling Gulfstream sat in a prime position near the main demonstration runway, gleaming white and silver under the desert sun. A crowd had already gathered around it. Word had spread. The Janitor pilot. The man who had passed the most difficult simulation on his first complete attempt. The one who would try the Sterling spiral for the first time in 30 years. James heard the whispers as he walked through the exhibition with Nathan. That's him. Doesn't look like much. I heard he mopped floors for 2 years. No way he pulls off that spiral. He ignored them all, focused on his son, on the aircraft, on the job ahead. Nathan tugged at his hand. Dad, look, that one has 2 tails. That's an F-22 Raptor, stealth fighter. Can you fly one? I used to. Nathan stared at his father with new eyes. Really? Really? You're like a superhero, Dad. Just a pilot, buddy. Same thing. The morning of the demonstration dawned clear and impossibly hot. James woke at 4, unable to sleep any longer. The anticipation was too great. He went through his pre-flight ritual stretches, breathing exercises, mental visualization of every maneuver, every turn, every moment. At 7, Alexandra knocked on his hotel room door. Breakfast? Can't eat. You need to eat something. I'll throw up. Then throw up, but eat first. He ate toast and eggs. Simple. It stayed down. At 9, the team gathered in the briefing room. Frank Morrison had flown in to supervise the ground crew. Commander Brooks went over the flight plan one final time. Alexandra handled the logistics. Demonstration begins at noon, local time. 17 minutes of airspace. You'll have complete control, no other traffic, just you and the sky. Weather is perfect. Clear skies, minimal wind, visibility, unlimited. And the crowd. 50,000 expected on the ground, plus global broadcast. James's stomach tightened. How many viewers? Alexandra glanced at her tablet. Current estimates are around 200 million. The number landed like a physical blow. 200 million people watching. 200 million witnesses to whatever happened in that sky. No pressure, Frank said dryly. All the pressure, that's why you trained. At 11:30, James walked to the aircraft. The ground crew had prepared everything. The Gulfstream sat gleaming under the desert sun, beautiful and ready. Nathan and Mrs. Patterson were already in the VIP section front row where Alexandra had insisted they sit. James climbed the boarding stairs and paused at the door, looked back. 50,000 people, cameras everywhere, the weight of expectation pressing down. And there in the front row, his son was waving, smiling, believing. James waved back. Then he entered the cockpit. The familiar embrace of the pilot's seat, the instruments waiting, the yoke under his hands. James ran through the checklist with mechanical precision. Master switch, battery, APU start, engine start sequence, flight management system initialization. Every system green, every gauge optimal. He reached for the radio. Tower, this is Sterling 1 requesting clearance for demonstration flight. Sterling 1, you are cleared for demonstration. Runway 27, wind calm, visibility unlimited. A pause. The sky is yours, Captain. James taxied to the runway. The aircraft responded perfectly eager to do what it had been built for. At the threshold, he stopped, breathed. Marcus's voice calm and confident. You ready, Captain? Ready as I'll ever be, Lieutenant. Then let's show them what we can do. James pushed the throttle forward. The engines roared. The aircraft accelerated. The runway blurred. He pulled back on the yoke. The wheels left the ground. And for the first time in 8 years, James Carter was not just flying. He was free. The first maneuver was a vertical climb. James pulled the aircraft straight up, G-forces pressing him into the seat. The altimeter spun. The ground fell away. At 10,000 feet, he rolled the horizon, flipping the desert, becoming the sky becoming the desert. He dove, controlled, precise. The ground rushed up. At the last possible moment, he pulled back. The aircraft were leveled. The crowd gasped. He could not hear them, but he knew. The next sequence was a series of high G turns, figure eights at 300 knots, each one tighter than the last, each one pushing the aircraft closer to its limits. The commentator's voice echoed through the exhibition grounds, transmitted into the cockpit through the radio. Remarkable precision from Captain Carter. These turns are at the absolute edge of what's possible in a civilian aircraft. James did not hear. He was somewhere else, in the zone, in the flow. 7 minutes in. The crowd was on its feet. Hammerhead turn. Vertical climb, 0 airspeed at the top, perfect pivot, vertical dive, textbook, beautiful. Then the inverted pass, flying upside down at 500 feet. The ground above him, the sky below. Counterintuitive, terrifying, exhilarating. 11 minutes. The halfway point. James climbed back to altitude, caught his breath, prepared for what was coming. The Sterling spiral. You sure about this? Marcus's voice, curious rather than worried. No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's my captain. James banked left, began the entry. 180 knots exactly. The spiral started wide, gradual building momentum. Then it tightened. The aircraft curved inward, climbing all the while. The G-forces built. 3 Gs, 4. Then the warning light flashed. Left engine oil pressure fluctuating. Not critical, not yet, but enough to make his heart skip. James had a choice. Abort the spiral land safely explained to 200 million viewers that mechanical issues had ended the show early. No one would blame him. No one would question the decision. Or trust the aircraft. Trust himself. Finish what he started. Marcus's voice calm in his mind. What do we do, Captain? For 8 years that question had haunted him. For 8 years he had heard panic in those words, accusation, the weight of a life he could not save. But now for the first time he heard something else. Trust. Marcus had trusted him. Even in those final moments, even as the ground rushed up, his co-pilot had trusted that James would find a way. James checked the gauge again. oil pressure stabilizing, within tolerance. The engine was holding. "We fly," he whispered. "That's what we do." He held the spiral. 5 Gs. The warning light flickered once more, then went dark. Pressure, normal. 6 Gs. His body weighed 6 times normal. His arms were lead. His chest struggled to expand, but his hands stayed steady. His mind stayed clear. James's vision narrowed, gray at the edges. He fought it, breathed against the pressure, squeezed his legs, his core, forcing blood to his brain. The spiral continued. Tighter. Higher. The aircraft corkscrewing toward the heavens. The apex approached. The moment of truth. James felt the aircraft begin to slow. The edge of the stall. The point of no return. Now. He kicked the rudder, pulled the yoke. The aircraft pivoted. For one impossible moment they hung motionless, suspended between earth and sky, between past and future, between the man James had been and the man he was becoming. Then gravity took over. The aircraft fell, nose down, accelerating. James held the dive longer than felt safe, longer than seemed possible. At the last moment, he pulled back. The aircraft leveled. The recovery was complete. The Sterling spiral. Perfect. For the first time in 30 years. The crowd exploded. James heard it even through the cockpit, the roar of 50,000 people, the thunder of applause. "Hell of a job, Captain." "Thanks, Lieutenant. Couldn't have done it without you." "You did it without me. I was just along for the ride." The final 3 minutes were a victory lap. Gentle maneuvers, graceful turns, a celebration of flight itself. James brought the aircraft down in a long, slow approach. The wheels touched soft as a whisper. The rollout was perfect. He taxied to the display area and shut down the engines. Silence. Then the cockpit door opened and the sound hit him like a wave. Cheering, screaming, his name being chanted. Carter, Carter, Carter. James climbed out and stood on the boarding stairs. 50,000 people on their feet. Cameras flashing. The commentator's voice booming through the exhibition grounds. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed aviation history. Captain James Carter has successfully executed the Sterling spiral for the first time in 3 decades. What an absolutely magnificent performance." But James was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at the VIP section, at Nathan, who had broken through the barrier and was running across the tarmac, at Alexandra, who was crying, at Mrs. Patterson, who was waving her knitting needles in the air like flags of celebration. Nathan reached him first. James jumped down, caught his son, lifted him high. "Dad, that was amazing." "You think so? Everyone's clapping, they're saying your name. They are, aren't they? You're famous now." James held his son close, the boy's arms wrapped around his neck, and for a moment nothing else existed. Not the crowd, not the cameras, not the weight of everything he had overcome to reach this point. "I don't care about famous buddy. I just care about you." Nathan pulled back, looked at his father with those eyes, Emily's eyes. "Mom would be proud." James's throat tightened. "Yeah, buddy. I think she would." Alexandra arrived, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around both of them. "You did it? You actually did it." "Told you I would." "You told me nothing." She laughed through her tears. "You just flew like an angel and made everyone fall in love with you." "Everyone." She looked at him, her eyes saying everything her words could not. Everyone. The gala that night was the most exclusive event of the expo. James wore a suit that Alexandra had arranged black tailored more expensive than anything he had ever owned. He barely recognized himself in the mirror. Nathan was with Mrs. Patterson at the hotel, already asleep, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Alexandra met James in the lobby. She wore a blue dress, simple, elegant. She took his breath away. "You clean up nice, Captain." "So do you." They walked into the gala together. 1,000 eyes turned. Whispers followed. "That's him, the janitor pilot. Flew the Sterling Spiral like it was nothing. Alexandra Sterling's been spending a lot of time with him." James ignored it all, focused on the woman beside him. "Dance with me." "I don't dance." "Tonight you do." They moved to the floor. A slow song played. James held her close, and they swayed together, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. "I can't believe today happened." "Believe it. You made it happen." "We made it happen. You gave me the chance." "You took the chance. That's different." Alexandra looked up at him, her eyes bright in the dim light of the ballroom. "James, I need to tell you something." "What?" "When I made that joke the day we met about marrying you if you flew the jet. I remember. I was being cruel. I know that. I've apologized for it." "You have. But here's the thing." Her voice dropped. "I'm not sure it's a joke anymore." James stopped moving. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere along the way I fell in love with you, with your courage, your integrity, the way you look at your son like he's the whole world." Her voice trembled. "I'm saying that I don't want this to end when we go back to Chicago." "Alexandra, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." James looked at her. This impossible, beautiful, terrifying woman who had changed everything. "I fell in love with my wife the first time I saw her, across a crowded room at a college party. She was laughing at something someone said, and I thought, that's her. That's the one." "James, let me finish." He took a breath. "When she died, I thought I'd never feel that way again. Thought that part of me was gone forever. Buried with her." Alexandra's eyes were wet. "But then I met you, and it wasn't the same. It was different, slower, harder. Like learning to walk after you've forgotten how." He pulled her closer. "And now I look at you, and I see possibility. I see a future I didn't think I could have. I see someone who believed in me when I was invisible." "Is that a yes?" "It's a maybe, a strong maybe." He paused. "Because I have a son who needs stability, a career I'm just starting, a lot of baggage that doesn't disappear overnight. I can work with maybe." "Good, because maybe is all I have right now." "Then I'll take it." They danced. The song ended. Another began. They kept dancing. At some point, Richard Sterling appeared at the edge of the floor, watching. When he caught James's eye, he nodded once. Approval, acceptance. James nodded back. The night wound down. The guests departed. The gala ended. James and Alexandra walked through the empty halls hand in hand. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we go home. You keep flying. I keep running the company. We figure out the rest as we go." "That's simple." "Nothing about this is simple." Alexandra smiled. "But that's what makes it worth it." They reached the exit. The Dubai night was warm stars scattered across a sky that seemed impossibly vast. James looked up. Somewhere among those stars, Emily was watching. He was sure of it. And Marcus, too. Both of them proud. Both of them at peace. "Thank you," he said. Not to Alexandra. To them. To everyone who had brought him to this moment. For what? For everything. For believing. For not giving up on me. I'll never give up on you, James. That's a promise. He looked at her. This woman who had offered him a cruel joke and ended up offering him a new life. I believe you. They walked into the night together. Tomorrow they would fly home. Tomorrow real life would resume. Tomorrow the challenges would continue. But tonight, James Carter was exactly where he belonged. 1 year later, James stood in the Sterling hangar watching the morning light stream through the windows. The place looked different now, not physically, but in the way it felt. It was home. The mentorship program had grown beyond anything he had imagined. 200 students across 3 locations, corporate sponsors lining up, waiting lists for admission. Derek Williams, a kid from Chicago's South Side who had joined the first class, was home from the Air Force Academy for the summer, working as a junior instructor, teaching other kids the same lessons James had taught him, passing on the gift. Nathan, now 8, was running through the hangar chasing a paper airplane he had made. His laughter echoed off the high ceilings, mixing with the distant sound of aircraft engines. Alexandra was in her office upstairs running the company that had changed both their lives. They had dinner together most nights now, the 3 of them, sometimes 4 when Richard joined. A family built from broken pieces, held together by something stronger than blood. Frank Morrison appeared beside James' coffee cup in hand. Beautiful day for flying. Every day's a beautiful day for flying. Heard from the grapevine that Miranda got a job. Regional airline out of Phoenix. Assistant to the assistant operations manager. James raised an eyebrow. Long way from Sterling. Long way down. Frank sipped his coffee. Some people never learn that the climb isn't worth much if you step on everyone to get there. She'll figure it out, or she won't. James shrugged. Not my story to write anymore. Getting philosophical in your old age. Maybe. James smiled. Or maybe I just finally understand what I've got. And what's that? James looked around. At the jets. At the students. At his son. At the life he had built from nothing. Everything. I've got everything. Frank nodded slowly. You earned it. We all did. Together. The pre-flight checklist for the afternoon charter was complete. New York bound. Routine. Simple. James walked toward the aircraft, not the G700 this time, but a smaller jet, perfect for short hops and training flights. Nathan ran up beside him. Can I watch you take off, Dad? You can watch from the window in Mom's. James caught himself. In Alexandra's office. Nathan grinned. That gap-toothed smile. Emily's smile. She said I could call her Alex. Did she now? She said that's what family does. James's heart swelled. Yeah, buddy. I guess it is. He knelt down, pulled his son close. I'm proud of you. You know that. I know, Dad. I'm proud of you too. Why? Nathan considered the question with a seriousness only an 8-year-old could muster. Because you fell down, and you got back up. That's what heroes do. James blinked back tears. Who told you that Mom did? In my dream. She said to tell you. James held his son for a long moment. Then he stood, ruffled Nathan's hair, and walked toward the aircraft. The cockpit embraced him like an old friend. The instruments glowed. The engines hummed. He reached for the radio. Sterling ground. This is Sterling 1, requesting taxi clearance. Sterling 1 taxi to runway 27 via Alpha. Wind light and variable. Have a good flight, Captain. Roger ground. Sterling 1 taxiing. The aircraft rolled forward. past the hangar where he had once pushed a mop, past the office where Alexandra was probably watching from the window, past the spot where 2 years ago he had been nothing but invisible. He reached the runway threshold, stopped, breathed, ready for another one. Captain Marcus's voice, still there, still present, not a ghost anymore, a friend. Always ready, Lieutenant. Let's fly. James pushed the throttle forward. The engines roared. The aircraft accelerated. The nose lifted. And James Carter rose into the sky, not running from anything, not chasing anything, just flying. Free. Whole. Home. Because that's what brave people do. They fall. They break. They lose everything. And then they get back up. They fly again. And they never ever stop.